Scott just joined.
What's going on?
Hey, Scott, just waiting for folks to join. So did that URL that I guess that URL that I just gave you worked? I presume.
I clicked it, yep.
Okay.
I can't hear John.
Okay.
That sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
You can't hear me because I'm not saying anything.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm on mute.
Hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
So, Scott, while we're waiting for folks, should we create an Etherpad and a place for people to dump notes and stuff?
Yeah. Do we already have an Etherpad?
I thought we might have created one already. I wasn't sure if you had one.
I don't know. There's a zillion of them.
Yeah.
There's a Cinder active vol service issues.
Okay. So I guess what we sort of wanted to talk about is to see how Gorka's patches that have to do with the atomic state changes in the database and how, if at all, it relates to the volume manager lock removal stuff. Because there seemed to be some kind of overlap there to me, but so I'm not sure where that falls in with the Etherpads that we have for HA and all that sort. So I mean, we could bike shit over a lot of different things, but I'd rather not waste a lot of people's time, you know.
All right, I posted that Etherpad. I don't know if it's
Okay.
too crowded with other stuff. I mean, there's just...
Yeah, okay.
I think the problem is that the topic is complex and it's hard to tame all that. And understand
I think
it.
that's a good Etherpad for a starting point. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
It's just a lot of stuff, and that's the whole thing. Is it's in many places, and there's different solutions, and people have different understanding.
Hey, Duncan's coming in. Cool. Hey, Duncan.
Hey.
Hey.
Is it foggy there?
For some reason, Duncan always looks foggy.
Yeah, my camera isn't active. I took it apart. It looked like it had condensation in it, so I took it apart, cleaned it, and now I'm foggy instead.
Okay. Periscope.
How about Gorka? We kind of want him.
I thought I saw him here for a second. Yeah, he was... Looks like he's joined, but I don't see him. Or hear him. Yeah, there's Jing.
Yeah, he's here. He's on mute.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear me. Or if
yes.
This is mute. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, because I have some browser problems and... Okay.
Okay. Good. Well, I guess this is a good test to see if this whole thing is going to work out for us for doing these kinds of things, but we'll give it a shot.
Okay.
It's like Eric's trying to join.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give it a few more minutes, I guess. Do-do-do-do. So do we have Gorka's compare and swap reviews anywhere handy? I don't see him in that Etherpad.
I don't know if I think I didn't add them today, but yeah, probably I should. Okay, I will add them now.
Do-do-do. Hey Sean, are you there? I see you joined. All right. Let me see if I can find Anthony's. Okay.
Sean's looking good in his picture there with the tie.
Yeah, he is.
Is that what you wear to work when you want your boss to think you're interviewing for another job, up to get you a raise or something? Eric's on. Should we roll?
I guess so. Yeah. Other people can join in whenever they're ready and chat about it. So I was trying to find Gorka's patches on the compare and swap because that's kind of what I wanted to get out of this meeting is to see. In general, we're trying to basically get to the point of enabling active-active, right? CVOL services for the same backends, but there seems to be parallel efforts that seem to be related going on, and I want to make sure that we're not overlapping, especially with respect to the Cinder Volume Manager local file locks, because it wasn't clear to me that if Gorka's patches for the compare and swap for the state stuff, if some of those can help eliminate the delete lock, for example, versus the ing checks approach, and maybe we need to have both. It started to get convoluted and confusing to me, at least, and I think Scott was along the same lines as I was, and so I wanted to see if there's any way that we can clear all this up, if at all, before the summit. So that's how I kind of wanted to frame the meeting, but if anyone else wants to talk about anything else, that's fine too. Silence. Crickets.
So I had one concern about the whole ing state check, which is just our backability score. If we're going with the microversion and keeping the current as our base microversion, that's not actually going to work because these are API change, these are behavior change. Which means we need to support both, and that's just not going to work as a active-active solution.
I think the situation would be that if you don't upgrade both Nova and Cinder to use the newer version, you can't do it active HA safely.
Yeah. I think our current thoughts on it were that we have to get microversions in place first. And then if we do the ing checks, we would have to patch Nova in all of Nova's calls to basically expect the new exception coming back from Cinder Client, because there are several cases that Scott and I found in Nova that they're not even doing a try-catch at all around the Cinder Client calls. Some of them they are, but they seem very generic, and so we would We started looking at creating a Nova spec to add some of those try catches, but some other folks think that we possibly just need to do a bug fix against some of those missing try catch sections. So I think at a minimum we have to do that.
So I think I was one of the people that I pointed it out. I think it's just a bug fix. If you look at the volume API, there's only like I think it was like 2 or 3 places that we're not checking for in progress states. I think we should just, from Nova's side, I'm not quite following. It doesn't really matter because if you, the only difference from Nova would be now we actually give invalid volume state for more conditions than we used to, but from Nova's perspective, it shouldn't matter because we should have been failing those things anyway, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I know
we
there's
should've.
more detail around what you guys are doing for active-active and things like that, but from our perspective, fixing the bugs on the Cinder volume API code, that shouldn't matter to anybody else. We should just...
Yeah. So Nova pushed back when we said that we were going to be returning volume is busy in the future. For example, during detach, there's no try catch when you do a volume detach. And if we start to return volume is busy where we weren't in the past, they claimed that that's an API change and requires spec API change in the whole process.
Well, so I guess what I'm saying is, I wouldn't change it to volume is busy. So if you look at the detach call in volume API right now, we only have one check, and that's for maintenance, right? Which I don't understand. That's kind of weird. My point is we already return invalid volume with the reason, right? What I'm saying is if there are things that you want to add to that, like detaching, attaching, blah, 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 whatever it is, just convert that if volume status, convert that to a valid status list. And if volume status not in list, raise the error we've always raised. And then we don't care. I mean, I don't care about Nova at that point. It's a perfectly valid, exception. So.
Yeah, but I think what they are arguing is that implicitly we have the API is changing, because right now in some cases, like Scott mentioned, it works right now. So if we change it like you're saying, that I must admit that was my idea as well. Just change it and return on other cases error exceptions as well. They have a reason to say that something that is working now should still work in the next release.
Oh, I disagree with that. That's so. There's a difference between API changing and bug fixing. You know what I mean? I mean that.
Yeah, but this is a behavior change, something that you could just say detach, and it took a little longer, but it worked. Now it will not work. So
right, sure. So why don't we just go fix a bug? So you file a bug in Nova and you fix it in the Nova code.
But they won't listen. They say they want to give the same API change rules they use, which are very, 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 very strict, to us. That's the problem. Nova want to force their API change rules on us, and changing the circumstances under which you raise an exception is an API change in Nova's book, and they do a microversion build every single time that happens.
Yes. Your argument is correct, I think, John, but Nova disagrees, and they're the ones that are going to block the code change in Nova.
Well, I don't think they would block it. So what
I guess they can't block our code change, but you.
They blocked the bug. We tried to put that bug fix in there. We tried to put a catch in the place they haven't got one, and they said that's an API change. That's Cinder changing.
Oh,
yes,
interesting.
they did.
Do you have a link to that review? I'd like to check that out.
I have to dig it up, but it's somewhere in there. We tried to do it as a bug when Walt's team put up the remove the volume manager locks in L release. We were going to also simultaneously put the try blocks in Nova. End of story, no problem. And they pushed back and said this needs a spec. It's a breaking API change, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You guys remember who submitted that?
Was it
I think it was Anthony that
yeah,
might have submitted one. Yeah.
Anthony Lee Liento?
Yeah, I can see if I can find it. It was related to the volume manager lock spec that he has up.
Anthony Lee, right?
Yes. Yep.
So the funny thing is, if we could convince them of this, putting a try-catch block is not a backwards incompatible change. In other words, they should just be able to put that in the Nova code, and our older Cinder servers that don't return volume is busy or invalid volume won't be doing it anyway, and it doesn't break anything on the Nova side. So it's more a matter of convincing them just to put the try-catch in.
Yeah.
Then all this, we have to do a bunch of convoluted stuff in microversions, which we may have to do for other features down the road, but Nova's going to change a lot.
If you follow the Nova microversion rules, this would be a microversion job. If you raise something under a circumstance you didn't before, that's a microversion bump. That is their rule, even if it's so-called backwards incompatible. And if you read the blog post with the 3 different types of users, it explains why that's a version bump. It's actually a good argument in general.
I get it, but I'm just saying a try-catch block is benign if you go from not sending the exception to sending the exception, because back when you weren't sending the exception, then it's just a no-op.
Yes.
I guess the whole thing is just confusing to me because we're not talking about end-user facing exceptions or changes or anything else. We're talking about internal requirements. But
anyway, it's the hoops they've got us jumping through, so it adds some complexity. But I think technically we can make it happen.
you can just change it on the center side, and if they fail, they fail, and then they can figure out what they want to do with it. It's their problem. Seriously.
Well, I think we tried that. Actually, Anthony had a POC up that removed the volume manager locks and was returning a volume is busy exception, and it blew up all of Tempest because of what Nova's expecting. So maybe if we go your route of just saying, hey, return invalid volume instead, and I don't know.
It's still going to blow it up because they're not.
It's still probably going to break.
They're not dealing with that exception because the exception only happens in a race condition. Nova does a check on the volume state, then it issues begin detaching, which can return the exception, and that the state has to change in between those two calls for them to currently get the exception.
Well, not only that on that case. I think that there's another problem. It's that we are calling inside Cinder to detach and attach without actually calling the pre-attach to reserve, so we don't change to attaching. So that those cases, they also use the lock to wait on that. I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly.
Yeah, that makes sense. We need to make all of our internal calls also gate on the state, right?
Right. Yeah. Probably they need to wait as well, or to fail if it's changing. But since internally we sometimes do we attach, but we don't change to attaching because the operation is different, be it migration or any other operation. We cannot use attaching state to exclude operations, but that's one of the problems to remove that lock, that we have different paths. The Nova path that goes through reserve volume, and the internal Cinder path that goes directly to attach. So
yeah. So here's a question that you may know, Gorka. If we fixed all this up, and internally we gated on the detaching, attaching states, and Nova did, and we added states for reading for something like clone or some of these other states where there's a missing state. Will we be able to remove all the locks, or is there any locks in the volume manager that won't get covered by using the API state, by having the API check state and block?
Okay, I think, for example, like I think Walter mentioned in one of my conditional update patches, he mentioned that if we add a filter to the delete method, API method, to actually check as well if there are any volumes being created using that volume as a source to fail, we could remove the delete lock, and we can do the same for a snapshot. So those two are really simple to fix if we can return an error on those cases.
I think we should be able to more easily because that won't involve Nova, right? I mean, that's
but let me think right now. Okay, no, I see. It could imply in the sense that Nova considered it an API change, because right now I think if you start creating a volume and you request a delete, it will wait on the lock, right? Or there are cases where it can wait on the lock, I think. Let me have a look.
Yeah, currently we get a lock in place.
Yeah, but do we check previously the state, or the lock is first, and then we check the status of the volume to see if we can delete it or not?
I think there are some checks in the API to make sure the volume that we're trying to delete is in a state that allows us to delete, but I don't think it does any checks against clones against that volume. I'm not sure. Which is the race condition that I think the lock is supposed to try and avoid, right?
Do you guys mind if we back up for just a second?
Not at all. Not at all.
Probably a good idea.
Let's go back to the attach thing. I'm a little confused. I'm not sure what the problem is here, because if you look in between volume API, right, where I said, oh, there's no, we don't have any good checks there, but look in the manager. The manager does a check and says, hey, is the status in, where's it at? I was just looking at this. The manager does the status checks there and raises and returns an error if it's not in a valid status. So I don't understand why you can't just fix this.
Well, because if you see the method, it has the decorator lock detach operation, which is making sure that only one detach is trying to check the status at a given time.
Yeah. Right.
So
that's why I was kind of confused as to how the compare and swap is related to this, because if the compare and swap is basically the gatekeeper to updating that state, then isn't that sufficient for removing the lock?
It is sufficient in the way we in Cinder see API changes, because we think that just because we were queuing the detach operations before and now we don't, that's not an API change. But
so I guess what I was trying to get at is if we do the compare and swap in the API before we even get to the volume manager, one of those requests is going to win and update the status of the database, right? So the next guy that comes in that tries to do that shouldn't be allowed to actually update the status, right? Or the state, and then it should fail, which is effectively what the lock is trying to accomplish?
Not because but what about internal Cinder calls that call detach without going through the API? You are not gating those.
So honestly, that's a pretty rare case anyway. But granted, that is definitely a condition to think about. But honestly, if you fix some of these larger interactions, right, which we've done over the years, I mean, we've fixed a lot of these. You'll make a significant improvement in the reliability and the quality of an OpenStack deployment, right? Just low-hanging fruit, right? So why wouldn't you just start there?
Yeah.
I mean, rather than try and boil the ocean and get every single possible occurrence, why wouldn't you at least first just go through and get low-hanging fruit?
Well, the thing is that when at least I like to, for example, I try to remove the detached volume lock, I could look into solving all the cases where it was being used, not just, okay, it was working before, now, okay, I will just remove it. It will work in some cases, like in the Nova interaction, and in the other cases, okay, we will have new bugs.
Well, I disagree, because if you do it in the manager, and then the local Cinder attached stuff is going to go through that manager call as well anyway. So
yeah, and we will be getting errors when we weren't before. So we have to look into all the code and make sure that no code to detach.
Actually, you were getting errors before, though. It just that's the problem. That's why we want to fix it.
Yeah.
So I do have one kind of left field thought here.
Breaking up, Duncan.
Yeah, I have no idea what you said, Duncan.
Your audio is breaking up, Duncan.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well. Now we can't hear you at all.
Is that any better?
Not really.
Just speak and let's see how it goes. Speak loudly. Enunciate.
Okay, so I have one left field idea rather than this ING check, which is a behavior change. What the lock is an implicit queue of actions on a volume. So I wondered, can we, rather than using ING check, can we just build a queue in the database? We've got enough atomic database operations to easily build a queue, and just have a list of things in the database that's going to happen to the volume. Just do them one at a time. It doesn't matter who does them then, it's gated on the database. And from an API point of view, you get exactly the same you've currently got, except with no races.
I think that's a decent idea, Duncan. I'd have to look at it and think about it some more.
I look at that one, and we have a problem. Then you have to implement as well timeout in those cases, or a way to clean that up if the process, if the node dies.
Don't we have that though with the current local file locks though?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you mean? When the process dies, don't the logs get closed?
Yeah.
So the logs are released. But we don't have that. I think so. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think so.
So I'm still.
Yeah, they are.
With ING, if you put an ING statement, it doesn't take it out. You can't have it. So you've got
Try that again, Duncan.
Yeah, I didn't catch any of that, Duncan. I'm sorry.
Sorry, but I refuse to agree with that.
You've got exactly the same timeout problem with ING states.
Yeah, we have the timeout problem with ING states as well, is what Duncan is saying.
Hold on. So again, I'm going to ask. The whole thing is kind of weird to me, right? So why that lock was put in there in the first place, I will never understand. But it is invalid to detach a volume that's already detached. I mean, I just don't. I mean, how can anybody argue that that should be a valid call?
Well, it's not whether it's a valid call. Commonly, we accept it. You can make it idempotent. What happens now? It's currently idempotent. So the common data behaviors, if it's called detached twice, they both get accepted, and you end up in a detached state. Calling detached on a detaching volume is currently valid.
Yeah, that changed in Liberty, didn't it? Because Nova instance delete was failing because of a race with detach or something, wasn't it? And we changed the API on the Cinder side to just be a no-op.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was backported to Kilo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only reason why those locks are in place is to prevent two actual API requests happening at approximately the same time of trying to do the same action, right? It's not that it's an invalid thing. The state hasn't been updated yet, so the API lets the call into the volume manager to begin with. So that's why I'm really about this, right?
So
if we do the compare and swap, shouldn't that solve that aspect of it?
So I think what I'm getting at, though, in the case of detach in particular, is back to what I was saying before. So you remove the locks, you set the state to detaching in the volume API side. If a call comes in, another detach call comes in, and it's in detaching state, then in the API, just do like we do today and just return. It's a no-op.
Yes.
Right? And then Nova doesn't know it doesn't impact any behavior or anything in terms of how Nova works or uses it or anything else. And we get rid of the locks. It just works.
Yes, I think that works if we get the compare and swap in place, meaning the atomic state changes.
I don't know what the compare and swap piece is. Sorry, can you clarify that for me?
That's Gorka's effort to ensure that basically we have an atomic state change. So we have two requests coming in that one of them is going to win before the other one tries to think it's successful as well.
Well, so what I'm saying is if you move that into the, and that's fine. I mean, that's totally cool. But what I'm saying is if you actually move that into volume API, that would just take care of itself. One of them is going to win.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Wait a minute, John. Is detached? Detached is currently blocking.
The what?
Detached is a blocking RPC from API down into manager. Like initialized connection. Or am I wrong there?
I can't quite hear what you're saying, Duncan, but we do have a look in the volume manager itself for detach. I don't know if that's a question you're asking or not.
No, I'm asking whether the call currently blocks until after the lock has been picked up by the second detach, or not.
I think I hear what you're saying. I'm not positive. So look in the volume RPC code, and you can see if it's a cast or not. So right now it's a call. So
yeah, so changing it to checking the API, detaching and just return, the API behavior change that can cause volume problems because currently they don't get a return at last this detach is done, even if it's a second detach. By the time it returns now, it's in available state. The detach has happened for both calls. So we just check that in the API. To emulate the current behavior, you've actually got a block in the API, holding the database.
not if you change it to a cast.
Yeah, but that changes the API behavior from Nova's point of view, from the client point of view.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
If they're relying on the old behavior, and they probably are, because they do lots of that, then you've actually changed things for them.
Possibly. Yeah, that's possibly true. Although for us, it's basically just a database update anyway. It's just kind of stupid that it even has to go to the manager.
Yeah.
So I always have the question that if we continue to use the API to gate on these ing states, is there ever a need for anything else like a distributed lock manager? Basically, the database is the distributed lock manager, right?
Well,
The state is.
The state.
For Cinder Manager, it is. For the drivers and some
That's
other
different.
operations, that's different.
That's
Yeah.
different. And if there's drivers that need locks, like distributed file drivers, we may not be able to solve that problem ever. That's sort of, I think that should just be punted on until some future date, and just say, if you want HA, you can't use NFS or whatever the drivers are that can't support, that need locks in the driver.
I think we can do it one step at a time, and leave it like you're saying for the last part, the drivers, to the locks on the drivers. And when we reach that point that actually Cinder can work in HA if the driver supports it, we can have a review and see, actually review the drivers and see, okay, do we propose a common DLM? We can look into that later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, there's some cases in the Fiber Channel Zone Manager that has local file locks today that doesn't work in HA mode either. And that's due to limitations on the switches themselves, having poor SSH interfaces, etc. But
But well, we can also look into that and see if we have other options like database or whatever. Yeah.
If you do FC, then you have to deal with it
So,
right now.
So what do we need to do to move this forward? Is the question.
Yes. So I think what I would like to see patches that Gorka has landing. If everyone thinks that those patches have merit, which I kind of do, and then see if we can start removing some of the local file manager locks and making sure that those checks are being done in the API itself before it gets to the volume manager.
Yeah.
Does that sound sound?
Yeah, but the problem is that I don't know if we can remove those locks without changing Nova to accept the SVC or exceptions where it was not in them before. You know, because now imagine you start creating a volume, so it creates a lock, and then you try a delete of that volume. That delete will wait until the creation is completed, and then it will do the delete. So if we gate on the state, it will change the behavior and it will fail now because it's created and it cannot be deleted.
But where is Nova calling delete and waiting?
I have no clue if they are using it or not. We can try. We can try to make the change. We add a filter to the API changes I'm doing, so it checks that the volume is not being used and things like that. But
it's not just Nova we're going to worry about when we change a behavior like that, though. It's every single customer script out there.
Yeah, also that.
And you can't check every single customer script out there. So behavior changes like that are actually important to analyze carefully. What scripts could people have written? Because if people can write a script, even in a fairly dumb way, people have done.
So then what do? We never change, we never fix this? You know, that's kind of what everyone seems to be leading to. If we can never change something, then we're forever stuck.
One path is microversions.
But
I think that's the whole idea of what microversions were supposed to help with, right? Is
microversions doesn't help that. API microversions does not solve that, because you're talking about changing things in the internal code that you check for. So regardless of what API version you specify or request, that would mean that you would have to do all of this logic and all of this checking at that API level. You couldn't do it in the internal Cinder code.
Well, you could have the API, if your micro version is high enough, call it, ugly as it is, call it a function that has a different name but doesn't have the lock decorator.
Oh yeah, I know that's where you're going.
Yeah.
It sucks, but
I think it's worse than sucks.
it's ugly, sucks, and pains me to even say it.
So you have micro versions for the internal Cinder code methods as well as for the API. That sounds like a great idea. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I look in the API code right now, and we do if volume status not in available, error restoring, error extending, etc. Then we raise an exception for an invalid volume. As far as I'm concerned, if you need to add something else in there, you add something else in there. That's
All right. So let's get the compare and swap stuff to land, and then see if we can remove one of the locks and see what happens. Run it through Rally, run it through Tempest, run it through all of the Tempest tests and see what happens.
I mean, if it introduces bugs and we have to fix bugs, that's the way. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The bug is in Horizon or a client script. It's rather hard to fix.
Yeah, but there has to be a fundamental decision, and this may be outside of Cinder, but we have to be able to make changes. I totally agree with John's point. If we're passing back exceptions, you should expect to get an exception. And if it breaks your client, your script, because you're looking for a specific exception, we introduce a new one, you just got to fix your script. I mean, there's got to be some way to make these changes that
we're already and we're already doing this anyway. So I don't understand. So the V2 API completely changed all the return code. What?
Didn't hear any of that.
Never mind.
I think that's the fundamental thing.
I'm looking at the delete method, for example, and I think with compare and swap we could probably remove the lock, but we still need to see where we are calling delete from within Cinder without going through the API. But I think it's probably possible to remove it in the logs from delete, create, and delete the snapshot. Those at least. I think that could be a first step to try that. I can create a patch that in the same chain I have now that adds that filter and see what the gates say.
Yeah, I would just do one at a time and see what happens.
Okay, yeah, I'll try delete volume and see what happens.
Hey, if it comes down to it and we need to do a V3 API to make this stuff acceptable, then that's, what we'll do.
Yeah.
I think that's what we all are trying to avoid. Okay.
I hear you.
A V3 just for this.
Okay, so maybe we'll do that and circle the wagons on the compare and swap patches, see if we can get those to land, and then see what happens with your follow-ups to that, and just go from there and touch base again in a couple weeks or whatnot.
Gorka, do you need help with this? You have something we can do? I can do?
Well, the compare and swap is basically keep going and removing possible races from other API methods. So any method that I haven't started working on, it's fair game. I mean,
okay.
if you want to start removing API races, just ping me and we can coordinate to get this moving, because there are quite a lot of races, and every time I start working on one of the APIs, I find something new I need to add to the code, to the conditional code. The last thing was that SQL Alchemy does not accept an update with order the arguments given with a specific order, and some databases like MariaDB do not behave the same way depending on the order. So if you do, for example, status equals updating and then previous status equal a status, it will set status and previous status to updating to the same status. They have to be in a very specific order. You have to first assign the previous status to status and then give a new value to status for the database to be in the state you want. So I'm trying to land a patch to SQL Alchemy to allow updating, to set the order in updating, because for some of the methods we are using the previous status, so we need that to work. So, well, anyway,
I'll get in touch with you.
Okay, great.
It sounds like we kind of have a vague idea of what we want to do now, which is try to get Gorka's patches to land, but I think, I don't know if we've even scheduled anything at the summit for this, but this conversation's not done, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we have a session for the HA stuff, I think, on the summit.
Okay.
So we probably want to continue there. I'm trying to create some specs before then. I'm working on one right now to help at least give some ideas of what we can do, for example, for the job distribution. And I will try to get that tomorrow or maybe the day after tomorrow, so we can at least start discussing the topics and get to the summit with a better idea of what.
Okay. I posted the URL to, I think, the first and the biggest conditional update patch that you have. If we can get guys looking at that, looks like it's not. It is passing Jenkins now, so there's some CI failures. We'll go through those. I'll see if I can do some rechecks on those and see if those can get cleaned up, and then get some more eyes looking at it. I know John had a comment a while back as to the direction on this patch, but I'd like to get people's consensus on this one if possible.
And does this patch need a spec?
It has a spec.
Okay.
The spec previously was not very clear. It was vague, but after John and, well, actually everyone told me that it needed to be clarified, I created a spec. I will look it and add it to the Etherpad, so it's easier to locate.
Okay. We need to get the spec approved. I mean, that's part of the on the way towards the patch, right?
Yes, agreed.
Can you add the spec to, I know you have a bunch of bugs listed in this patch, but can you add the spec and possibly the blueprint associated with it in the comment, and the commit message? It'll just make it easier for folks to find it.
Okay, I will add it to the patches.
Cool, thank you.
No problem.
And so I guess as unfinished business, we still don't know how to make changes that involve other consumers of Cinder, Nova, and others that we don't know about without a API version bump or some magic we haven't yet thought of to not change the behavior of what we're returning. Is that right?
So I think John was right, though, in the respect that this is going to do nothing more than return an exception that we're already kind of returning, right? It's an invalid volume request because it's actually not in a state that's acceptable for the second one that comes in, right?
Yeah. So I guess we have to decide if we just do it, or do we have to decide anything? We just do it.
I think we get this patch to land after we get everyone on board with it, and then Gorka said he was going to do a follow-up patch to work on one of those locks and see what happens.
Yeah, the delete volume.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent approach, and we could see from there.
Yeah, because the delete actually could not be breaking any API implicit or explicit contract. It will just be removing possible races, I believe.
Yes.
And help us internally.
Yep. Which I think that was the whole entire point of those locks is to prevent those edge case races, and not to actually impose any kind of logic or workflow changes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. Run it through Tempest. Famous last words. Okay. So shall we touch base again next week and see if we can get folks to look at the spec and get this reviewed and get everyone happy with it? I think that's our action item, if anything.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I think this is pretty productive, much more efficient than trying to hash this out over IRC. And we'll see if this actually got recorded to my YouTube account so that people can watch again if they ever want to. So,
Walt, can I volunteer you to sort of post a few things in IRC for the record that we just talked about and decided on, like
sure,
the 2 or 3 action items, and I mean.
Yep.
Okay, I volunteer you.
Okay, thank you. No problem. All right, guys. Have a good afternoon.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Morning.
See you.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.